Let's come on, see. Sporting here.
All right. And it looks like we're live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first OriginTrail Community AMA of 2020. Actually, first one of the decade as well. So you might, a lot of people here might know me as Guinnessstache and a bunch of the different community platforms that OriginTrail uses, whether it be Telegram, Discord, or even on Twitter. When they asked me to do the AMA, I was so excited to be part of the first AMA of the year. And in the AMA today, we have all the founders. We have Giga, Tomáš, and Branimir. What's up, guys?
Hey. Happy New Year to everyone.
Yeah, Happy New Year. New year, new me.
Yeah. It's Branimir. It's Branimir dropped. I guess we have.
I don't know if you maybe just want to go over maybe what happened in the end of 2019, the last quarter, Q4, and some changes to the network and some of the different things that were in the V4 upgrade to get us to where we are today. So,
seems like we dropped Tomáš and Giga, but this is totally a question good to start with. From my end, so yeah, thanks for having this AMA with us and hosting it. I think it's a really good thing we got this going so quickly. Yeah, the network, it was actually pretty. You guys are back.
Yeah, you're back.
So Guinness, Guinness asked about the recent updates, so I'm just gonna summarize a bit what was actually done from at least from a technical perspective. It's actually been an update we've been expecting for quite a long time. So we've been working on it in parallel with implementing the solutions built on top of OriginTrail. And what we've seen is that we've been hitting some limits on the way. So several of them have been involved when we were actually working with implementing cases which involved a large number of events, of supply chain events happening, being submitted through a single data set. And actually, it's something that we're still going to be optimizing for in the future. But one of the main things that the protocol now enables in version 4 compared to version 2 is actually a much bigger scale of this. And when I'm talking events, we're talking specifically GS1 EPCIS events, which are kind of the backbone of the protocol. And maybe in a really quick sort of summary of what the protocol does is it actually helps you find the complete history of a certain object or basically anything that has an identity. But in the supply chain use case, it's an object that has an identifier on top of it. For example, if let's say on this packaging, that would be this barcode. And then let's say I'm a company, a supply chain wanting to see what happened with this specific object. I would be able to ask all the nodes in the network, which might be run by various companies and institutions, and not even companies, but some anonymous data holders, where basically the protocol would merge all this data together and into something called the knowledge graph. So you could actually see the whole history, meaning whatever has ever been published on this particular object or batch that this object belongs to. And with this specific update, there's been several important new features there. Apart from increasing the capacity, also there's a very interesting feature called the connector, which actually is there to cryptographically verify that two parties have claimed the same event happened at the same time with the same parameters. So it kind of provides an interlock, of two claims, kind of like the blockchain verifies that a certain transaction comes from a certain wallet. Here you verify that a certain event was claimed by a certain company. Apart from that, also there's been improvements in the network regarding security. So we've went ahead and updated the Academia implementation in the network layer, which during the period of last year has been security audited by the actual team that's been developing. So it's we're utilizing the Cadence project for this, and they've had some very thorough security audits and tests, with which they have upgraded the network. So in terms of ODN per se. These were not specifically problematic security issues, at least at the moment where it was going. But like for future updates, because this was a breaking change, it meant it was very sensible to do it at once. So we actually have a more stable implementation of the network layer on that end. There's also been several other improvements in how actually data is being handled. So there's a new abstraction layer. And I know I'm going a little bit too technical, so stop me if I'm going.
No, it's a technical AMA, so.
But yeah, I guess that's what we should do. So there's we no longer take a certain data set that conforms to a standard like GS1 EBCS and basically import it into the node directly. Rather, now there's a layer in between, a layer which might not seem so important at this moment, but it will show its power in the future because it extends interoperability quite a lot. And this is the actual layer of the OT JSON format that we coined the term for. Essentially, what happens there is that any single data set, like be it GS1 EPCS or maybe W3C Web of Things data model, which the protocol also supports. Both of them get translated into a very generic graph OT-JSON form. And that's very close to, or actually loosely based on JSON LD, which is something that is a specific version of JSON format for linked data. And what basically this means from kind of a high level, if we observe it as a black box, is that from now on, it's much easier to add new data standards. So basically whatever anyone can create a program that translates a certain data model, whatever it might be, an old data model or a new one that might be created in 10 years from now, as long as it can be translated directly to OT-JSON and back, which in theoretical terms, it has to be possible because OT-JSON is very generic and it basically explains objects and relations between them. And these objects can be anything. So the idea there is that anyone can create something we call the importer-exporter script. And for example, you, Guinness, could write one for something of your interest. That can be mapped to the graph. So now that it's much easier to engage in development, other developers can build it much easier because you no longer need to go all the way down to the database level. So you actually, literally, it's much less of skill required to build that. Also, that means it's faster. So even like if, let's say, we were to see that the need to build an additional converter, how we call it now in the new version, it would take just a significantly less amount of time. So that's another important aspect of it. Also, we've introduced several specific acceptance criteria that define what needs to be, what the network needs to support, and each of the updates that are coming up have to conform to these acceptance criteria, because that means if not, then the network is obviously not operating as it should. An additional important thing is that we also try to make it easier for someone to run a node and set up the pricing. And I'm pretty sure that the community is now well aware about the new Lambda factor. The Lambda factor is there. I know it might be a little bit, well, I'm not sure if confusing is the right word, because the idea at the beginning is that it actually makes it less confusing. But when you get introduced to the concept for the first time, it's probably new. So the thing there is that instead of thinking in terms of 3 or 4 variables, someone who's running a node can think in terms of 1 variable. And that's a very big sort of improvement. In that sense, it helps abstract several things so you don't have to think about them. In that regard, the Lambda factor is something that actually I'm very excited about to see how it develops over time, because that's in a way equivalent to something that, or somewhat equivalent to gas, in the concept of gas in Ethereum. So we were going to see a market develop there as well. And then those are just some of the few updates that have been important here. One of the things that also was something that was updated was that we actually decoupled several parts of the code in between, and this update also produced a new API. So there's a difference in the way API looks now, and there is actually more powerful. So you can get more features out of the node, and some of these things are, for example, the export feature. So, for example, you can import the file, and then a year later you can export it into a format that you like, and that's something that is useful for enterprises, especially because for them quite often it's moving data from one sort of format to another. Some of the projects really have the need for this, because you'll see everything in supply chains. Excel is probably one of the main tools people still use. So if you want to move from Excel to something useful in a different context, or in the context of a knowledge graph, you need to provide exactly this, the context, and that's something that standards provide. So so in that regard, it's much better to have multiple things you could do with the data sets even before they get into the node and the network, or afterwards as well. So you can actually have more options to process the data. Let's say it like that. I think I covered most of it. But yeah, Tomasz and Giga, feel free to jump in. I went through the technical stuff mostly, while you had technical issues.
I hope we'll be stable from this point on. We did do our best to make it happen, so fingers crossed. Yeah, so if I understood correctly, we're kind of like doing a quick overview of the last couple of months and what's been going on, what's been most exciting. Giga was actually sharing quite a bit over the last couple of days in the last year of some of the things that were achieved just in 2019 alone, and it was quite. It's very interesting to make those kind of dissections at a certain time to be able to even comprehend all the different things, because from day to day it's really kind of you may lose the overview of all the things that have happened. But I guess you know, in the last couple of months, also from what we were sharing with the community, some of the use cases we were finally able to talk about, and we will publish them on the refurbished website, which was exciting. And of course, those are there to kind of we see them get developed even more and further, which is something that we really look forward to in the new year. A lot has been happening in the context of European consortia projects that we've also seen pick up the pace. So that's been. Those are maybe sometimes also a little bit slower, but as you kind of go along, you really can do a lot because of just the sheer size and the vision behind some of those projects. On the other hand, we have some of the more agile and fast ones, like around data marketplace, which are really falling within what was set out even a couple of years ago to be one of the key focus areas. So it's really exciting to see those things coming to fruition right now. And yeah, it's like going forward even more so.
Mm-hmm.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks for giving a recap, because I know going into some of these questions, if people weren't familiar of everything that's happened in Q4 and where the V4 mainnet is now, some of these might not make total sense. So I'm going to just jump into one of the first ones we got, which is what has caused the increase in holding time for node rewards? And I guess what they mean by that is we noticed last year on the ODN mainnet, a lot of jobs were around 7 days or so. And as soon as we upgraded to the V4 mainnet, we're now seeing 6-month-long jobs, and those jobs are at different variables of TRAC. It would seem too. So, is this just like a business use case that's changes, or is this something we should get accustomed to seeing more as longer jobs on the ODN?
Yeah, I mean the driver for these type of changes is always the business case. So, and to your last question, the last point, if we're about to see more of that, I would say yes. as we discover more use cases, and also we're speaking about a couple of them, you see that longer period of time are delivering really even bigger value sometimes. And in the case of verifiable credentials of any sort, you really need to have that longevity. So anything that's a long-lived asset in physical or in digital form that needs to have integrity over this long period of time makes a lot of sense to be associated with the network like ODN. So 6 months is something that was like the one jump. We are expecting to see even more. So I think in terms of a couple of years, in terms of buildings are around for a long period of time, so you need to have even longer longevity when it comes to something like that. I don't know if combining real estate and then trying to figure out what the hell's in there would be much easier if there would be kind of a long-lived asset next to your building that you could look into. It's very, very, very kind of like the example from the other side of the spectrum that might come in play at a certain point. Yeah, I'd say longer jobs are something to be expected.
Yeah, I would think something like a fire cladding system for a building has to be around a long time, yet a plumb might only need to be around for a week. Yeah, so it really does come down to the business use cases in that sense. All right, awesome. Are nodes with higher reputation more likely to get selected for jobs? If not, why? Because I know originally when we were told about the reputation system, I don't think it was ever fully clear to people how the reputation system works, or if it's even fully implemented yet. If you could speak to that.
Sure, yeah, let me jump in on that one. So regarding reputation, that system is something that, first of all, any reputation system is pretty hard to implement. So it's, especially if you want to make it very fair, I would say. And in that sense, we've been contemplating and testing several different things we could implement. And we decided to go with the first relatively soft version, I would say, which makes sure that a couple of things are satisfied. So the most important one being decentralization. So we wouldn't want to have the ability that someone might influence the reputation a bit too much. So in that way, reputation operates in a peer-to-peer fashion. So very simply put, if you and I have a node and our nodes interact somehow, if this is a positive interaction, our nodes are both going to give points to each other in positive points. And if there's a negative interaction, that means a negative interaction could be your node was supposed to, let's say, keep data for my node, but it didn't do it. And we had to go through challenging and litigation mechanisms. And in the end, the result was negative. Then let's say my node would consider your node to have a bit of a lesser reputation than before. So it's kind of like adding and removing points in a very basic way system, but each node does it for the nodes it's been interacting with.
Which I think that's important too, because originally I think people thought it was just going to be this general reputation, but just if Giga doesn't like me, it doesn't mean that Branimir doesn't, for example. So it shouldn't be penalized for what others may see me as for something that's happened on the network. Exactly.
And also there's a couple of things there that that would be a little unfair to put on the smart contract. Also costly. So the more you use smart contracts, the more expensive everything becomes. And in this way, because it's a peer-to-peer network, essentially what the node does is a node, and maybe the best thing to do is just to explain how the process works once again. So the node wants to publish a certain data set on the network of a certain size for a certain data lifespan, like you mentioned in the previous question. And then all the nodes from the network respond if this, all the nodes that like this offer respond to this. So that means if the offer is very bad in terms of compensation, your node would not respond. How does it decide? Well, that's exactly the pricing, the lambda factor I mentioned. It also decides on a certain several thresholds. So like, for example, the data lifespan is one of the thresholds. So if you set that your node is not going to even consider anything that's above 5 years, it won't respond. But then, so that's from the DH side. DH nodes respond to my node collects all the responses, and what it needs to do is it needs to do a mathematical calculation in order to actually finish this offer, because the smart contract is expecting a certain cryptographic solution that can only be achieved if a large enough number of nodes, DH nodes, respond to the DC node, to me in this case. And now the thing there is, if I dislike Giga's node because I've had really bad interactions with him, I can just discard, my node will discard his node from this list, but that means I will need to have a significantly large pool of nodes still in order to finalize this offer, which now means that another thing is that there's no common setting decided by any authority, like, I don't know, ourselves. It's really up to every node to set their level of minimum reputation that they want to interact with. So in that regard, it's also, we're going to see how this develops in time, what nodes will be ready to tolerate, let's say like that. But so far it hasn't been there, so it needs some time. The reputation is something that obviously involves a certain period to pass so that we can actually check. And to finally explain the last part, let's say the network is on for 10 years, and then 10 years ago your node made a mess for a few days and then got some bad points. There's a certain expiration mechanism, I would simplify the whole thing, which basically takes the latest events, the events that are closer to present, let's call it very precisely, more into account than the one that are back in the day. So essentially, if your node has the ability to improve its reputation with the other nodes, if it works well or is positive interactions. I hope that answers it.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's good to know that there's a self-healing mechanism put in place for that. Just so, or else people would just keep spinning up nodes every week and being a bad actor. So, great. All right. So, when will NOS be live? In the meantime, how are companies currently acquiring TRAC tokens? And I know in the roadmap in the last few months, we saw some of the checkboxes for NOS now available on AWS or DigitalOcean in Oracle's cloud platform. Are their companies already able to access that on their own, or they still need assistance from the team in order to use that? And if they're not using NOS, or even if they are using NOS without the Bittrex integration yet, I'm assuming that the team's helping with the token management on those NOS nodes.
Yeah. Okay, I'll take that one. So NOS is being used. So some components of the NOS are already in use with the companies that we work with. They've been it's a software as a service approach, as described also on the TraceLabs website. So the value propositions of the NOS are already available for the companies globally to engage with. As you mentioned, the Bittrex integration is something that as we have the adoption going forward and more companies onboarded on using the NOS in one way or the other, it's becoming a bigger pain to have that automated process in place. But of course, companies still right now are also using Trace to when they publish data on the ODM, but it's just not an automated process. So it's not like they would do it per action, but rather we help, like you mentioned, with the token management, so that for the companies, it's still in credits terms. So for them, it's all USD. When they need to calculate how much something will be on a running basis or something like that, all that is done in USD as expressed in credits on the NOS. And as they use it up, of course, we make sure that there's always enough Trace for them to execute on the actions that they would require at a given time. But as we now move forward and really see it getting more traction and also more usage on an ongoing basis, this automation will really be something that's required also from our perspective, just because it's a lot of work.
It's a nightmare to manage all those wallets.
So it's easier to have this automated process done. and also it totally elevates like in yet another way how companies are able to interact with DLTs in general, and so it's going to be yet another barrier that we hit, jump over. But for now, yeah, we do the token integrations, and NOS is live in use. But of course, it really depends on the type of company and the type of implementations on what they require. Sometimes it's more lightweight, sometimes it's more integrated process.
All right, awesome.
Also being far more merciless when it comes to iterating on the network operating system, because obviously this is a proprietary piece of tech, and we are basically respecting certain principles of building a lean venture. We're also respecting this principle when it comes to the OriginTrail, but OriginTrail is an infrastructure that has to be constructed very carefully with respect to wider community, both business and token holder community, whereas network operating system is something that we tweak and change quite a lot. But it's great to see not only the NOS and the kind of the native features that we have built in already being used by the companies in plenty of sectors. We have actually, as a company, gone from food supply chains into many other industrial use cases. What's also great is to see that even other pieces of technology, not necessarily developed by us, are being somehow interlinked with NOS and consequently with the OriginTrail and the ODN. And I saw a question a few days ago around the open call that we launched last year. And even the winner, Kakasi, the company that actually came to visit us in our offices, has already started integrating Kakasi with the network operating system. And so far, we and I believe also them have received quite a lot of very great feedback from their customer base. So we see that NOS is evolving very quickly. That said, it's going to take some time for us to really show it publicly, because one, it's a proprietary tech, so we don't want to feed our competition, because as a proprietary builder, we do have very strong competition. And two, we still need some time to see that this proprietary piece of tech can be shown publicly. But we believe that this will come to fruition very very quickly.
I guess just speaking to that too, I think some people have been wondering, would NOS be something that even a data holder might be able to utilize one day, or is it strictly for your DC customers and for supply chain?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, we might even see some companies becoming data holders. So network operating system needs to be sustainable, and also someone needs to maintain it, and there's also a business model behind it. So
right, TraceLabs.
Yeah, potentially, if data holders would see benefits in using network operating system, potentially, hypothetically, that would even make a very good and compelling use case.
Yeah. For now, it's focused on business users mostly, but similar functionalities.
Great. All right. Let me go to the next one. What is the biggest barrier still preventing more companies and organizations to use the ODN? Are you still seeing a lot of barriers out there, or are you getting feedback from customers that say, "Hey, I would really love to be on this platform, but we just need these few little hurdles met first, or to get over"?
I think it's easier to reply to this question if we zoom out and take the entire period of our company into consideration and see how cumbersome it was before we started developing OriginTrail protocol, not only to gain traction, to gain interest, within different business ecosystems, and prior to our development, to the development of OriginTrail, it was very difficult to gain widespread recognition when it comes to your technology. Not only because we are much stronger now, our voice is stronger and louder, but also because companies missed the infrastructure part, the middleware that we can now provide. So right now, if we can, just kind of quickly zoom into this period, we are several times quicker when it comes to adoption of decentralized plus, proprietary technologies that we're building. So in that regard, there are no obstacles to the adoption. That said, kind of the only obstacle that we see right now is we as a bottleneck. So we need to see how we can more quickly equip other companies to start servicing their clientele with the technologies that we provide, including, of course, OriginTrail protocol. But that's just the kind of a natural barrier, and this is also following a very typical adoption curve that also other companies are subjected to. But other than that, apart from this very natural adoption curve, there are no obstacles.
Awesome.
Maybe the one that it's not an obstacle, is just like an observation maybe from the entire ecosystem's perspective, is that there was a lot of talk about a lot of things over the course of the last couple of years, and kind of also when we made a deep dive into the open source and developing the blockchain-based protocol, it was like a wave that it seems to be that we're going to be kind of swimming together, and we just found ourselves to be ahead, at the very brink in terms of what is available from the technical side, as well as from what has been implemented in terms of the just pure mainnet implementations and utilizing DLTs, especially in enterprise context. So, I mean, in one way, maybe there was, from the entire crypto or whatever we want to call it ecosystem as a whole, you would maybe be expecting to be seeing more. But on the other side, we feel comfortable to also spearhead this movement, because we still see enormous potential and value in seeing these technologies be used as they should be in a decentralized context.
And I know I've heard over the last year some of the biggest feedback with some of the permission systems, like IBM's solutions, is that nobody wants to just have IBM be the big blockchain that they that owns everything, and so they're hitting limitations where they want to move towards those, but they don't want to be just bound to IBM. So it seems like it's a really good time to start bringing these permissionless systems in to bridge those permission systems. So that's awesome. Let's see. Would you consider to have a bug bounty program to find bugs and to strengthen the network? I guess incentivize people to, if they find any bugs, or to go out and find bugs and then report them and maybe be rewarded.
Yeah,
you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah. Essentially, the development of the protocol is ongoing, and this is something that we would really like to involve the community in more. So part of this effort has also been coming around the release just now. So we've released quite a lot of new documentation, especially the requests for comments. I know I've been mentioning this throughout the last couple of AMAs. It would be really, really great to see even more feedback on them from the community, and we'll try to do that in the coming period, that we actually enable it so that it can be easier to do. But essentially, that's one of the efforts that are there to strengthen the network and the development. Another one would also be the bug bounty program, which we already had a couple of times before. So the idea is to actually go ahead with it in the future. Yeah, at this moment in time, it's not still up, but it will be announced in relatively near future, where we actually are heading with the development of 4.0 and how the community can engage, including through the bug bounty.
Awesome. And yeah, I know mentioned a couple months back is be working on a community site. So I'd assume something like this would kind of be merged into that type of community site. Good.
Yeah. I think we feel the beans a lot on that side. But
all right, this is a long one. How will major updates or major bugs be handled once OT's funding is run out? Right now, we have automatic updates pushed to our nodes. This can't continue if OriginTrail doesn't run the ship anymore. How will you prepare the community to drive ODN node software so the network stays healthy once you're gone? Or will Trace Alliance take over that responsibility? Whew, we get some water.
That's very morbid, but okay.
It sounded very cataclysmic.
Well, I think what they really meant by it, I think, was being an open system, an open source system. The idea is anybody can take this code, anybody can run nodes, anybody's free to do with it and work with the ODN. But say one day OriginTrail is no longer what it is today, and all development moves over to TraceLabs, which makes sense because it's that's the for-profit business to build on top of the open source software. That being said, who's going to be maintaining what V5 looks like or V6 looks like, or if there's any bugs, who's patching these and who's agreeing on these patches? Is Trace Alliance going to get together and say, hey, we need this use case? Can we all get together and say that this is a valid use case to start developing on and agree to have development made towards that?
I think there are two aspects of it. It's the usability angle of the OriginTrail and the governance angle. And if we touch upon the usability angle, the usability angle is even more important than the, let's say, the treasury management and the ICO effect that we did 2 years ago. And we believe that it's not about the the relative spending that you have right now as a post ICO company that will determine how able you are to basically update the code for the OriginTrail protocol in the future. It's rather our capability to build in the usability for the OriginTrail protocol and the OriginTrail decentralized network. And so far, our main motivation to develop and continue developing OriginTrail into the future is its usability. We see that companies are looking for our services because of OriginTrail protocol. It's not because of the things that we have developed or have been developed or will be developing in the future as in the scope of proprietary tech. It's the protocol itself, and we have had companies basically coming to us and requesting OriginTrail technologies, OriginTrail fundamentals to basically help them out in achieving better trustworthiness when it comes to data exchanges, better structure, and also better interoperability. And all these value propositions can be achieved only through OriginTrail protocol. And as long as we see the usability of OriginTrail growing, there's going to be a very good future in front of the OriginTrail. So usability is something that we bet a lot on. We see it, companies see it, so that's the best fundamental for the future. When it comes to governance, I think Tomasz and Branimir can also jump in. Trace Alliance might be one part of the reply to how we aim to improve the inclusiveness of the overall ecosystem, of the overall community, which does not only involve token holders but also business communities. And we have seen this evolving, but in the future we might see that the governance could be steered towards the direction of either Trace Alliance or some other formation which will help us. Hopefully we will remain an active part. I mean, it's in a 5 years time, it's going to be a privilege to still be part of the OriginTrail ecosystem. But we see that other actors will definitely have to join in, not only for the sake of better decentralization, but several actors can make better decisions or more qualified decisions for several sectors. So governance as a second part of the reply is also something that will have to be is being looked into and improved on constantly.
Oh, awesome. This next question is probably more for you, Branimir, and it kind of speaks to, I guess, on the same level of what we were just talking about, is how will you handle jobs that haven't been paid for when there's a big update? This time you paid it out before the job was done. Will that always be the case? And I guess what they mean by that is when we saw the upgrade to V4, we noticed in the network that jobs were paid out beforehand in order to kind of, not risk any TRAC being lost, but if we were to go to like a V5, for example, and we do have jobs that are 3 years long, how are we going to handle that update? Like if a node gets stuck when updating or it takes too long, how do we know they're not going to go into litigation and then lose all their TRAC that they've been holding just because of a network upgrade, for example? Or how would that be handled?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Just to clarify, the happenings that were going on right now with the update was that each of the nodes that was being updated actually was in order to make the transition as smooth as possible, and with having in mind that this was a breaking change in certain ways. One of the main ways actually was the Kadimlia part of the network, where essentially each node got a new identity, and that was part of this security audit that was done for Cadence, the project. Actually, they realized that the parts of the cryptography that was used to generate the identity were not optimal. So what essentially that meant was to change the way it was made. And in order to switch these identities and through this breaking change, without having to involve anyone running a node to actually do this by themselves, the team has written several migrations, that's how they're called, the scripts, that actually try to migrate your node from the old version to the new one, which involved this aspect of it where the node would check if it has any outstanding jobs on the old mainnet, and then decide to actually pay them out so that they don't actually lose any of the tokens that they have been working for. What the update also, what the update has done basically is most of the already existing smart contracts are still there. Certain contracts have been slightly updated, and the nodes essentially just instructed that if they would like to do an automatic update, that actually should do a certain procedure, and part of that procedure was to pay themselves out, which again was done by the nodes. So it wasn't, I think somewhere in the question you mentioned that we paid out the tokens. Well, actually we could not do that. That's something that the node could just do. But essentially in the future, the idea there is that first of all, the idea is not to have too many breaking changes. And if there is a breaking change like that's needed in order for the network to run, then obviously you can procedure to be implemented for the users to use for it. But if a job is, let's say, somewhere halfway done, a non-breaking, at least in the sense of the smart contracts and data layer, a non-breaking change would not cause any disruption to the already existing jobs. So think of it as your node runs on certain code, keeps certain data, and then the code might change, but the data doesn't change. It's still there. And so if you switch this part of it and still keep the data, the smart contracts still keep all the information about a certain job, then there's no need to transition. So in that regard, the idea is not to make any breaking changes. Here, the issue was that we have a new identity essentially for a node. Mm-hmm. So in order for you to have the tokens associated to a certain identity, well, basically, if you move to a new one, you won't be able to take the tokens associated with the old one. So therefore, this update was something that's a little out of the ordinary. We don't expect these to happen every few months. More likely, a couple of times a decade, maybe. That's something that's to be expected. And then still, it's really a layered question, like if it's an update into the code or the way the data is stored. And then finally, there's also an aspect of all these changes being something that are also a matter of choice. So in a way, anyone who is running a node is able to decide if they would, kind of like in a blockchain, if you were going to follow, let's say, Ethereum or Ethereum Classic, because you make a decision on it. It's very similar here. You can decide not to upgrade to a new version, and then everything pretty much stays the same, which is the way decentralized networks have to work anyway.
All right. Well, awesome. 50% of litigations have failed in the last week, which seems incredibly high for a VPS-based node system. Is the team aware of this, and could there be a problem with how litigations are run? I'm not sure where they pulled that percentage from, per se, but I do know that there's been some weird stuff with some of the litigations that we've seen. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I think I've looked at OT Hub, and I think the number comes from there. Because I think, and to be honest, I'm not sure how OT Hub calculates this number. We didn't get time to ask so BBNM, so we can actually figure it out. I'm pretty confident that litigations are not failing, because from the observations we're making is that every single litigation that gets started gets completed, and that means that from the perspective of the protocol, everything functions well. The other question is why these litigations are occurring in the first place. That's a little hard to answer, because we're not sure, and then we're not able to even detect that for every single litigation what was going on. If a node was offline, or if it lost connectivity, or something was blocking it, it's quite possible, but we're definitely looking into it. And one of the things that I actually wanted to ask the community to do is by default, none of your nodes send any logs to the team, which is, for obvious reasons, it should stay that way. But you can decide to opt in and to turn this option on in the config file and actually send us logs, so we can actually figure out what's going on. The nodes that we actually have access to, meaning the nodes from the companies and a couple of nodes that the team is running to observe what's going on in the network, everything that they're observing on the network seems to be in order. We do notice several things that can be improved already, and that's something that comes from the situation of running in the mainnet environment, which is more realistic than a testnet or any sort of staging environment that we've been testing in. So we see a bit of a different parameters, but we're observing and we're actually preparing an update, that the 401 update, which will be coming out next week, which will do a few little fixes and will also help us observe things a little better, so specifically in the logs. So essentially, short answer is I'm actually pretty sure that the 50% number is not correct. The litigations are going correct, because you can see that on the smart contract, so that's very visible. Why they're occurring in the first place, we're not entirely sure, but we're looking into it, and we've observed some of the nodes trigger litigations but get responses, so everything is okay. But what happened with the connectivity there is it's always going to be something that's not 100% verifiable, because it's not infrastructure run by one entity. If it was right. Even then, observing a couple of hundred nodes is a job, a pretty big job. But if you want to do it in a manner where you have an anonymous network, essentially, which now it's even more anonymous, because right now you no longer have to do any application in order to actually access the network. Right now, anyone can just join it, turn on the node. It's pretty hard, but the team is doing a really good job. So I'm confident we'll find the culprit and have a better answer next time.
Oh yeah, and as somebody who's done network upgrades as part of my career, I always tell people everything looks perfect until I get 7,500 people jumping on at 7 a.m. on a Monday. So you never really know until you get that load. So it's needed, and then it's good. It's when you find some of the little quirks that you would normally find in the test net. So awesome. Where do you see the data marketplace launching and evolving after 1 year, 5 years, etc.?
Yeah, we have been basically spitting out different products in the last year, and data marketplace, we place high bet on it in the future, not only for not only to help companies first of all valorize, and also then to monetize data they produce one way or another. And basically the core premise why we started working on data marketplace is that the value of data has surpassed the value of crude oil a couple of years ago. And in order for companies to monetize data, also SMEs, not only Googles and Facebooks, we need to make sure that there are certain preconditions for companies to be able to do so. And some of the preconditions for them being successful in monetizing data and also securing their data, so they need to basically regain access and control over their data. Their data is to structure that data properly, and this is also a feature of OriginTrail, which will help them do that. And then, of course, the untrusted data needs to be trusted, which is again something very much connected to OriginTrail, and the interoperability part, whereby also OriginTrail can help companies basically achieve the data interoperability and then effectively achieve systems interoperability. And we need that if we want to have data marketplace, successful data marketplace in place. And we have seen several companies going that direction. Whereas exactly for those three reasons, exactly for those three kind of core value propositions of OriginTrail, we see that we have a tremendous advantage here, also already from the get-go. So when we started developing, and we basically are now also prototyping the data marketplace, we see that we have an enormous head start already. And in the following, actually this year, not in the following year, the year has already. We are over the hump at this point. We see that the data marketplace will be tested in the operational environment in a few months already. So that what implications will that have for the OriginTrail community? We see that apart from the kind of the utility, trace token utility, which is mainly helping companies pay for the kind of storage and some very important computations on the network. So in addition to that, we see that the trace token might have. So this is not something that we did not promise in the first white paper. We are analyzing right now how the trace token might have additional utility as a consequence of the data marketplace and the concepts that we aim to derive from the data marketplace itself. So it's an exciting project, an exciting potentially a product for the future. And the good thing is that we also have a backup. We are backed up by the European Union funds here. So this is already a project which is not anymore reliant on on the initial treasury that we have been using for the core features of the OriginTrail protocol. And at the same time, of course, the basis here is very important, which is OriginTrail. So in the few months going forward is going to be the operational environment first. We already have companies that have volunteered to start testing the prototype, and then we believe in Q2 of this year we might start talking about the first results of the data marketplace.
Awesome. I know people are super psyched about that. We don't know what it's going to look like, but we're excited,
So that's 6 months, right? 5-10 years down the line, it's even, I think the old options really start opening up. I know that last time around, maybe half a year ago, we were mentioning the knowledge graph and the potential of that. And so once you start, one of the main really kind of, it's not barrier, but just like, it's a cool blocker, is how to really make these monetizations go at the same time as the data transfer, right? Or how can you really quickly find a data set that would be good for you and then kind of have it integrated, and you know that the structure you're receiving it in makes sense for you, and you can quickly kind of put it into whatever you're doing. Is it ML/AI modeling that you require, or is it your optimization of the supply chain, or is it something third? God knows. And now if you do have that infrastructural piece that allows you to kind of find that data or to make your data accessible because it's been locked right now, and you don't have to share the entirety of it, but just index it really smartly and share it by posting proofs, and then offer that. It really opens up a lot of potential to build out this knowledge graph that if you rely solely on kind of relations where you have to agree with your direct buyer or supplier the entirety of the deal, takes a lot of time, and just it's a pain in the ass to set up. Whereas if you have something that's like a very quick thing, it's like a pipeline that then you can just shove things through. That's really
Yeah, I think something like weather data, for example, is a good example of that, where sharing weather data across the world, it's weather data. So you put it in, it goes in, and they get their data, and it's something that can easily be shared from multiple different places.
Example, yeah. And then, but someone doing an analysis on how to do irrigation for crops in that particular area, they'll be excited to pick that up from you. Yeah, you just pay you whatever, but at least the IoT stuff that you maybe had in your garden before, just to kind of check what's the weather at home right now, also gives you an opportunity to kind of monetize that. And I mean, going back, it's not something that's science fiction. We're literally putting this out in a couple of months' time. So it's not because we've seen a lot of different attempts to achieve things like that, which we always were kind of wary of, because we didn't kind of see all the pieces fall together just exactly right to how to make that happen. At least from the context that we were approaching it, from the business context, from the context of the companies that we were talking to. Whereas now, when we kind of see all these puzzles really fit as nicely together as we've kind of hoped it would when we made the initial kind of direction, also to tackle this challenge, it's looking good.
Awesome. This was my question, so of course I'm going to put it in there and make sure I get. Can we? And this is probably for Branimir. Can we configure nodes to schedule payouts on a set time frame for the TRAC jobs? Say, for instance, that are 6 months or 2 years. Like, could I set my node so I get a weekly payout or a daily payout or maybe a monthly payout, rather than have to go through, for example, OT hub and hurt my fingers clicking on my ledger for every single job that I might want to pay out that's in process?
Yeah, that's a very valid point. Yeah, that. So in regard, just to make sure that I understood, like, let's say you would like to, every certain period of time, a month, you would like it to automatically be paid out.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah,
so I don't have to wait for the job to completely end, but I can get paid out what I've already earned in the job, for example.
Yeah, that's something that so the partial payout is something that that's already there. Basically, it's supported. Essentially, the idea there is that there's no very good, let's say, from the UX perspective, we don't have a mechanism that would do this on a certain period of time, which definitely can be built. And to be honest, I would. Since this is something that hurts the community the most, I actually would invite the community to try and maybe with some of our assistants to help us, because again, that comes down to the story of the question we had before, is who's going to take over. We do want more developers and specifically developers from all I would say all different aspects of software development. So enterprise companies that would join in and develop, but also just people who are working by running a node. You guys know what gives you the most pain. Mm-hmm. And that's in a way kind of gives the most validation to what needs to be developed further. So I'm really excited to see that we're moving in this direction to include the community more. So I would really like to see someone post more of these questions or ideas, or ideally, jump in and start coding on this. It's not that hard, actually. There's something called the command executor in the node, which we will definitely in one of the future tutorials expand on, which basically allows you to write a list of commands your node wants you want your node to do, and in this way, this would be one command that would just have a certain repeatable command that would have a certain delay. And this is, if anyone wants to go into the code, I'm pretty sure they would really quickly understand how it works. That would entail writing a new command, setting a certain delay. Ideally, this delay would be able to be set through a config file and through Houston then, so it wouldn't need to go anywhere. But bear in mind, it wouldn't need to go to OT Hub and do this. But bear in mind that every time there's a withdrawal, a payout, it costs you a bit, So in that regard, everyone should have the choice on how many times they want to do it. But there's definitely a great idea for a feature, and all I can say is we're looking forward to more ideas. But we will also like to encourage proactivity on solving such things. I know that not everyone in the community is so tech savvy, but we'll try our best what we can. So we'll try to shoot all the tutorials out that anyone can start using it. I don't know if you've seen the first one, but it's really the most basic one, how to actually use the node. So what actually the trail feature of OriginTrail is.
Oh yeah.
And what it's meant to do. So we're going to have more of these with the idea that we bridge this gap, so it's not so hard to join in. So you don't have to be a rockstar developer in order to build such things. Like Tomasz said, this is not rocket science. But in terms of data marketplace, though, like one of the things there, for example, is that when we were developing it, one of the things why there's also a reputation system being introduced now is that because of the products that we've been working on, and because of the, you won't find a marketplace, an online marketplace, without a reputation system. That's also an example of how these major infrastructural updates need to be done, but also from the perspective of the product. So we're not working on purely science and developing things and then seeing how that matches to the real world. We're doing both at the same time and actually moving more towards the idea of first validating and then developing, even when it comes to infrastructure. So that's where the reputation is there. With that in regard, because these are quite big chunks of work, some of these things don't really come as obvious to us, like the one for the payout. And so anytime anyone from the community has an idea, or ideally can help contribute to the code, that would be perfect. We'd love to see that, and we'll support that. And that's totally in the spirit both of the project as well as of decentralization.
Okay, awesome. I'll try to keep moving along. I know we're going over an hour now, but when will companies like EVRYTHNG BSI have the capability to fully utilize the ODN? What does OriginTrail team see as hurdles for companies in adopting ODN or buying TRAC? Any problems with regulations?
No problems with regulations. I think that the main difference between OriginTrail project and perhaps some other purely blockchain projects is that we're not competing against central banks. That's why there is no Congress in this world that would hate us.
Right.
Quite to the contrary, we have governmental initiatives. Actually, just recently we got into one of governmental initiatives that will fund a project here in our country, Slovenia, to basically construct end-to-end visibility in organic food supply chains. So this is something that we see as a very good sign also from the governmental part. So in contrast to other projects, we are basically a poster child to any government-related body because they see a lot of benefits for general society when it comes to the features that we offer. So regulation is not a problem. When it comes to working with companies, and this is something that we might even invite Jure to talk about. He took over the general management of TraceLabs and has been working with bigger companies and SMEs aiming to use and already using OriginTrail. And there is always this general adoption curve which you cannot just skip. When you work with companies, there is always legal departments involved. You need to sign the NDA, then you need to sign some other pieces of document which you then need to submit to your legal team, and it takes time. So there's also a lot of accountability, not only accountability towards the community, you guys, but also accountability towards the companies. So here, of course, we need to respect privacy, and also OriginTrail is now going into the direction that it is also becoming a privacy-enhancing technology. So we don't necessarily need to dump all the data onto the network. We were reading a few open calls from some of the countries, which basically stipulated that decentralized or distributed ledgers or blockchains cannot be used to store any
personal
data or personal data. So this is something that we are taking into account and actually trying to seize this as an opportunity, not as an impediment for the adoption of OriginTrail. And we are also looking to ways how to basically create an advantageous environment stemming from that fact. So government regulations are definitely not an impediment. Yet, when it comes to working with companies, there is, always that curve. But we see that we're riding along pretty nicely. And in the future, by the way, I believe that we can also involve Jure to speak more about the kind of technicalities of how companies get onboarded into using OriginTrail network. And just to give you guys an idea what are the dynamics, basically from A to Z of implementing this kind of technology.
So does that apply to US too? We're kind of the black sheep when it comes to regulations around the world. Like we're always put in the same category as like North Korea. But I mean, I just know the US regulations are tough here in the United States. Has that been an extra barrier, or was what you said pretty much the same for a lot of the United States companies?
Yeah, perhaps we're lucky. I think European Union is a very good jurisdiction when it comes to decentralized solutions. So in that regard, European Union is better than the United States. Hopefully no one from the regulator side is not listening to that, and if he or she is, I hope they will take this into account in the US. But as we already said, because we're not posing any threat to the governments, we're only improving the general welfare by increasing transparency and basically giving companies and individuals ways to basically to create a more trustworthy environments in several industrial sectors. That's why governments are not posing any impediments to the development and adoption of OriginTrail. US, I know they have.
And it's true that we always took extra caution also in terms of how we structure every single decision in terms of working with companies as well as kind of running the ecosystem to make sure that we comply with everything that needs to be complied with and that we're on the safe side, so we don't feel that there's a pressure. And like Giga said, we didn't create something that's there to replace the US dollar.
And no one's buying missiles with TRAC tokens.
I think to do is just that OT as an ecosystem is focused on different value propositions that we go after. And where we see value of decentralization really being brought forward, and it's something that has been validated to do so by lots of governments around the world. So like we actually do see that the government, especially now having this opportunity to be involved, so on really modeling out a system for that's based on a decentralized network. And you can only see that the value proposition for governments is definitely there. So if anything, we'll be excited to work with including U.S. government and
all right,
and around the world.
Awesome. Only a few more to go. Don't worry. I'll let you guys get out to your Saturday night festivities. The current version of litigation on the ODN does not include replacing data holders who fail litigation. Is this planned for a future update?
Yeah, that one is really for me. So yes, this is something that as we're rolling out new features, we don't roll them out immediately in full swing. So the idea there is to be what's the word in English? Step by step, I guess that's the best. So that's actually the next step in terms of enabling the features on litigation. That's why it would be useful to have more eyes on it in terms of getting more logs. So we'll definitely reach out to BBNM and see where he gets a number of 50%. From what we observed, the smart contract basically constantly shoots out events and for each litigation, everything has been going on so far well. The replacement is something that should immediately. And just so I give a bit further perspective on how this should work. So the first step is the replacement is on and is being done by the same node that has published the data. This node publishes data in 3 flavors, which we called colors, which basically means 3 different encryptions, so that we have a verifiability that there's at least 3 different digital copies on the network for the 3 data holder nodes. In the future, this number might grow, but from the perspective of the white paper and from the perspective of the whole mechanism behind it, if you look at the white paper, there's a 2n+1 number, which essentially gives us this as the minimum value, and actually it could be lesser, but there's no need for that at this moment. And the idea there would be that in the future, because approximately a third of the network, or a little less than a third of the network, receives a certain flavor of the data set, that any of these nodes might be able to trigger, to actually see that the litigation has happened, to apply for the replacement process. So there's no need for a single node to actually start it. At this moment, when the mechanism is going to be on, the DC node will trigger the replacement, and then the whole process basically starts all over again. So the next step would be that actually any node will be able to do that, to trigger the process and join in. So it's going to take a while, but one step at a time.
Baby steps, right? Do you envision the 3,000 TRAC minimum decreasing in the future if the price changes? If so, how will this decision be made once the TraceLabs switch is complete and the network is fully open to develop by anyone? How do you balance decentralization with having some minimum barrier to entry? And I guess the point with that is, say the TRAC token does go to $1 one day. I mean, now you're getting into a fine line of are you pricing people out from contributing to the decentralization? So is that something you could look at and readjust over time?
Yeah, there's certain mechanisms there that don't even require an intervention, really. So there's 2 mechanisms right now that can be enabled in such a way that actually they automatically adjust according to the network state. One of these is actually the network difficulty. So that doesn't have anything to do with the initial stake. It's more about this offer creation process. So that, let's say there's a network of 50,000 nodes. In that regard, we're talking about, when we mentioned 3 flavors and 1/3 of the network, that's a significantly larger number than 1/3 of 200 nodes. Right. And in order for a DC node to not be able to go against decentralization, which means that they need to solve a certain problem that has a certain level of difficulty. This level of difficulty is kind of in a way like in blockchain with proof of work, the difficulty comes from the size of the network in terms of the processing power, so the hash rate. Here it's more about, we measure the decentralization in terms of the number of entities that have joined the network and staked a certain amount of tokens, actually created their own identity on the network. So the more identities on the network, the easier it is going to be for someone to, let's say, go against decentralization. So the difficulty has to grow. And this difficulty is something that the smart contract, even if you look at the smart contracts now, the smart contract is equipped to raise this difficulty once enough nodes join the network automatically. Now, this mechanism is something that also needs to be monitored at the beginning. So we're sure that the difficulty is, because no one has built anything like this yet, it's not like a usual proof of work difficulty mechanism. We need to make sure that we don't make a mistake somewhere in an assumption. Similarly to the stake amount as well. So if let's say we see a lot of nodes join the network, and we see a lot of staked tokens because of the jobs and everything, there's just a lot of activity. If there's tons of them in the network, the smart contracts can actually see that, and they can adjust and say, okay, now it's probably not wise to have such a large amount for anyone to enter the network to stake. So it's no longer maybe 3,000, but maybe 300 sometimes in the future. Who knows? But that's something that ideally happens because of the state of the network.
Dynamically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if the system notices that there's not enough tokens for it to function, it needs to, let's say, loosen up the requirements so that there's more tokens in circulation for the network to actually work. So that's where the system is actually going to be, where we're heading with development, toward the situation where there's no single party or even like an organization needing to make such decisions, especially such very highly technical or even mathematical decisions. It would be ideally the system itself.
Great. Awesome. The new price factor calculation for jobs uses TRAC token price relative to Ethereum. If the price of TRAC token increases with Ethereum, then jobs will become increasingly expensive for data creators. Should this calculation be using the TRAC price relative to USD or another currency for fairness?
Okay, I think I understand it. So the question there is that the answer really is that the formula, the whole idea of the formula was that it encapsulates the cost of withdrawing tokens. And this cost is denominated in ETH. Essentially, it's a gas cost, and gas is paid for in ETH. So this coupling will have to remain because a certain amount of gas is used, and pretty much always the same amount, very little variation there. That's why this trace to ETH pairing is used in the formula. But that from that perspective, it's something that should allow someone to make a better prediction regarding a node to make a better prediction regarding the price, so that it doesn't end up with a negative ROI on a job. From the perspective of how this converts to USD or euros or any other currency, really, I think this is another topic. It would probably be useful, but it's more, I believe, more useful from the perspective of actually setting it up, so that when you're looking at the setup of what your lambda should be, that you're not looking at trace, but you actually can see other currencies as well. But from the perspective of the formula, it has to work with ETH because the cost is in ETH. So it's kind of that simple, I guess.
Awesome. That's pretty much most of the questions. One of them is not really a question, but I just thought it'd be interesting for you guys. There's a guy in the community, Daniel. He owns a number of racehorses, and he actually has submitted his application. I don't even know if you can see it on this or not, to name the horse OriginTrail. So his next racehorse is actually going to be named. So hopefully one day we see a race, and hopefully in first place we see a horse named OriginTrail running around on TV. So I thought that was really cool. So
yeah,
throw that out there.
Cool. I mean, it's an open source project.
Yeah.
We would need to, I guess, he would need to check with some lawyers. Applications might he expect. I mean, we personally don't have anything against it.
We can send a sticker.
Yeah.
A horse wears.
You might have to start making horse like saddles and stuff like that to go along with it. But all right, guys, thanks a lot. It was awesome. Thanks for having me. I love doing this stuff, and I love talking to you guys. And I love the project. You guys are doing crazy, awesome things, moving a million miles an hour, but at the same time doing it right and putting out a great product. And the network's strong, the nodes are working, they're cranking, so it's awesome. So thanks a bunch.
Thank you, Guinnessstache, for hosting us, and also for your overall efforts in the community. I believe that this kind of marks the point where we can start communicating with community in a more bi-directional way. So in the future, I'm sure there are going to be plenty of opportunities where we can talk in a similar format, and perhaps invite additional guests and have everything even more kind of bi-directional without. Yeah.
We'll just have Branimir and BBNM like, side by side going at it for 5 hours about the.
Why not? That's a good idea.
That sounds like an easy task for us. So.
Well, it's much better like this. Like, I think last AMA when I was speaking, I was reading the questions, answering the questions. It felt a little
awkward.
Yeah. I was about to say lonely.
Well, awesome. Anytime you guys need me to run an AMA, I would love to. You know that. So.
Appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right.
Thanks a bunch, guys. Have a good night. Go out and go have a beverage. Go have a Guinness.
Cheers. Cheers, Guinness.
Take care, guys.
You too. Bye.